Hello, I'm State Representative Ross McGregor from the 72nd House District. Welcome to Ohio in Focus.
Hello and welcome to this edition of Ohio in Focus, a program that brings state government to you. I'm your host, Brad Miller. We have with us today State Representative Ross McGregor, who serves the 72nd House District, which includes portions of Clark County. Thank you for joining us, Representative.
I'm happy to be here, Brad. Thanks for having me.
So you're currently in your fourth term in the Ohio House?
That is correct. I was appointed to the House of Representatives in 2005 and was then elected in 2006 and re-elected in 2008 and 2010, and will be up for re-election here this year.
And tell us a little bit of what inspired you to get involved in politics in the first place.
Well, I've always been very involved back in my community of Springfield, and through various organizations that I was involved with, really got to see the impact that state government has on our ability as communities and citizens to be successful. And so I really wanted to become more engaged and offer something back. When the opportunity was presented to be appointed to the position, I threw my hat in the ring and was fortunate to have been selected to receive that appointment, and feel even more honored that since then I've been reelected to office.
And you also have extensive experience in the private sector as well, and continue outside the House in that realm.
That is correct, Brad. I am the executive vice president of our family's manufacturing company. We're manufacturers of axle and brake components for heavy trucks primarily, but we're also involved in the automotive and agricultural and lawn and garden and solar industries. So I've spent my entire professional career as a manufacturer, which I think gives me a lot of insight, particularly in today's economy when job creation is so vital. I'm really pleased to be able to offer my insight as an active manufacturer in the state of Ohio to my colleagues as we're crafting legislation that we want to promote job creation here in Ohio.
Do you notice that that's valuable too with other members of the House? They bring their backgrounds into the House as well?
Absolutely, Brad. I can't tell you how important it is. Every member of the General Assembly comes to the institution with a background that is unique to themselves. And that's one of the great things about this job, is the ability to learn from my friends and colleagues who have differing backgrounds. And on occasion, I get to share my knowledge with them. Now, the key is, do we all listen to each other? But it is really one of the best parts of being in the General Assembly, in the legislature, is being exposed to so many people with so many different backgrounds. It's a wonderful education.
And you mentioned job creation. We've heard a lot of job creation over the last 2 years throughout this General Assembly. And every district is different, though. What would you say are the top issues facing your district?
Job creation is number one back in Springfield and Clark County, without a doubt. And I'm very pleased to say that recently we've seen some things that have been very positive in that front. We've seen increased production out at a major truck manufacturer that's located in Springfield, and that's been good news. We've seen a new hospital that's been built in our downtown that has brought jobs into our urban core and helping to launch a revitalization of our downtown area, and that's been very positive. We have a new company altogether that's moved into Springfield from Eau Claire, Wisconsin, and chose Springfield to locate their 300 employees. And we also have another company that's just launched a new operation in an industrial park that has the promise of hundreds of employees within a few years. So there are some very positive things that are going on in my district as it relates to job creation.
You're also working on a number of other bills as well. One has to do with collateral sanctions.
Yes.
Could you explain what collateral sanctions are and tell us some of the things that's in this bill?
Brad, something that I think is very important for Ohioans to understand is how is the money spent. And the fact is that the majority of the money that we allocate through the budgeting process is spent on three main things: education, Medicaid, and Department of Department of Corrections. So when you look at analyzing spending and trying to reduce spending, you always go after some pretty large things, and that's what I've done working with my colleague Tracy Hurd on the collateral sanctions bill. We're trying to look at reducing recidivism in our prisons. And as I think all Ohioans know, recidivism is when a person who has been incarcerated is released and then they reoffend and find themselves back in prison. Very costly. And so what we've done is analyze what are some of the things that could lead someone who has been released from incarceration to want to offend again. And we have found that there are a number of these collateral sanctions. These are not necessarily, a person is charged and found guilty of a crime, they are sentenced, and then they serve their time. But once they're released, for example, we are training people in one institution on how to be optical dispensers, yet upon release, because of a conviction, they are prohibited from ever holding that type of a job. That would be an example of a collateral sanction. So we have worked with a number of stakeholders over the last few months to try and identify those issues that we can all agree on. And this is not the end, but just the beginning of the process. But we will be introducing a piece of legislation and hope to see it work its way through the process here, ideally before we break for summer, but that could be a little ambitious with everything else we're working on.
That's right. And the bill also deals with licensing. Maybe you touched on that. Could you explain that a little bit more?
Well, yes. Again, it gets back to the fact that if you have paid your debt to society from your sentence and you're released and you've kept your nose clean and you're ready to cut back out and rejoin society and be a productive member, why are we inhibiting people from receiving licensure to pursue occupations that could help them provide a living for themselves and their family? And in some cases, it just doesn't make sense. Now, there are situations, if you are convicted, let's say, of embezzlement or fraud, and perhaps you're not going to be able to work in the banking industry upon release, if it was a felony conviction or something. There are some situations where that is warranted, but we have a host of others where it really just doesn't make much sense, and it's a hindrance to people reentering society and trying to do the right thing.
Also, you have a lot of work with, you are the chairman of the Transportation Subcommittee. First, could you explain kind of how subcommittees work in relation to the larger committee? That's part of the Finance and Appropriations Committee, is that correct?
Yes, Brad, that's correct. The House Finance and Appropriations Committee is the largest standing committee that we have in this chamber. And what we do, because of all the topics that are brought before the committee, particularly through the budgeting process, we have broken it into subcommittees. And everything's important, but it's important that education issues have a venue that is focused solely on education issues. And in my case, I'm chairing the subcommittee that deals with transportation and justice issues. And so we are focused on, for example, the ODOT budget. The transportation budget is a budget that runs through our committee, and we manage that and work with the interested parties in trying to allocate the funding, the scarce funding, I might add, for infrastructure here in Ohio. And then based on our recommendations, we bring those back to the full committee, the full Finance Committee, that will then make that ultimate determination.
You're also a member of the Transportation, Public Safety, and Homeland Security. Keyword there being transportation. Again, these are two different committees dealing with transportation. How are those different, and how do you?
The subcommittee, the Transportation Subcommittee on Finance, is more oriented towards the actual allocation of revenues and how we're funding infrastructure through the budgeting process. The Standing Committee on Transportation is a committee where we will hear any number of transportation-related issues, and those could vary widely from being surface transportation or air transportation or maritime transportation. For example, the current proposal to raise the speed limit on the interstate system here in Ohio is in the Standing Committee of Transportation.
And you've had a couple of hearings recently. Okay, what can you tell us about those?
Well, we've done some work here recently, and I think that most Ohioans are aware that the Department of Transportation and the track process, the means of trying to organize infrastructure projects, the Transportation Review and Advisory Council, recently, for a lack of a better word, has recalibrated the prioritization of some projects here in Ohio, and it's a difficult thing to have done. It's not pleasant because we're having to tell some communities that a project that they thought may have been programmed to start in 2015 may not now start until 2025, as an example. And so, that's bad news for some communities, but I think that it's important that we be honest with Ohioans about the fact that we just don't have enough money to do all the projects that people would like to see done. There's an insatiable appetite for infrastructure money, and I think most Ohioans know that this money is funded through the gas tax, and that is a declining revenue stream, given the fact that automobiles are more efficient these days. People are driving less as it is due to the high price of gas already. And we're also seeing an influx of new alternative fuel vehicles that do not rely on petroleum-based products to run. So we're having to look at what money will we have available and then allocate those appropriately. Again, it's not a pleasant thing, but it's being honest, and I think that's what people want to see out of their government.
There's also a hearing about the PUCO testimony on the MBR, mid-biennium budget review.
Yes, there was PUCO has just tried to clean up some language. They are in charge of, they have oversight over motor carriers, and they have been trying to clean up some language. The one thing about the revised code is, over a period of time, as changes are made here, changes are made there, sometimes, little sections need to be recalibrated. And that's what the PUCO wanted to do, and certainly they did a lot of advanced work to engage interested parties. And I think it's more of a maintenance type issue with the language than anything that's hugely controversial.
So you said you've been in the House since 2005. Mm-hmm. What do you enjoy most about this job?
Well, I touched on it earlier in the program, Brad, and that is the education. I am constantly exposed to things that, I would not otherwise have any, if I were just back home running the business. I mean, and not to say that isn't big, but that's where I'd be focused. In this job as a legislator, I'm learning all kinds of things. I'm exposed to a lot of different issues. I also serve on the Joint Committee of Agency Rule Review, and that particular committee is always fascinating in the way that you see how the real impact that the rules and regulatory environment of Ohio have on Ohioans. And again, it just is a wonderful education.
So we have just a little bit of time left.
Sure.
this job is obviously about serving the public, serving your constituents. What's the easiest way or the best way, the way you recommend them to reach out to you?
Well, I believe, I take great pride in wanting to be connected with my constituents, the people who I am elected to serve. And to that end, I have regular district office hours back in Clark County, and those specific hours can be found on my website. And I'm certainly happy to just sit down and talk to anybody. No appointment needed. I'll be there, and if I'm feeling flush, I might even buy them a cup of coffee.
I might show up.
Yeah. Otherwise, emails are always very good. I think it's an easy way to communicate. Telephone calls, I try to return every call that I can from my constituents, and I think, and again, and I'm happy to actually have a separate meeting. If none of those avenues work, I try to make the time. So if someone wants to meet with me, I think it's important that I be available. So those are some of the best ways to get a hold of me.
And that's all the time we have today, Representative. Thank you for joining us.
Brad, thanks so much.
We look forward to seeing you again on the next edition of Ohio in Focus, the program that brings state government to you. Thank you for joining us.